In 1868, God used Ellen White in a very unusual way in the Washington, New Hampshire church. A little background about that church. It was the oldest congregation of Sabbath-keeping Adventists in the world. And they had a pastor for a period of time named Frederick Wheeler. But Frederick Wheeler was called away in the late 1850s. And so for several years they did not have a pastor, and they were spoiled. Most of our churches in those days did not have pastors. We didn't have enough ministers, ordained ministers, to pastor churches. They were out doing evangelism. But that little church had for many years had a pastor, but then, as I just said, he was called away. So without a pastor, and being kind of spoiled by having one, things didn't continue to develop well spiritually for that congregation. In fact, it finally got to the place where they were hardly holding services anymore. Some were still subscribing to the Review, the church paper, the Review, but spiritually the congregation was in decline. And James and Ellen White and another minister, Jane Andrews, heard about this, and they decided to come and visit the Washington, New Hampshire church. And some way word got out that the Whites were coming, and of course they needed to make certain that they have services. If the Whites are coming, they can't admit that things are not going well spiritually, so they organized services. And on December 23, 1868, something very interesting happened in a meeting with that church. Not in the church itself apparently, but in the home of the man that for many years was the first elder of that church, Cyrus Farnsworth. In that meeting, which lasted for 5 hours, God showed Ellen White the condition of the spiritual condition and things that were going on in the lives of various members of that church. And she had not met most of these people ever before, but under the Spirit of God, she would point to someone and she would begin to describe what was going on in their lives. Some of the people she was encouraging them. People had said negative things about them, and she was trying to encourage them by saying, you know, they're not being fair to you, things that have been shown. How would she even know these if God hadn't shown her? Because she had just come to town. She didn't know these people. Others, she was show that they were doing things that were not right, even though they were claiming to live otherwise. Well, seated in that meeting somewhere towards the front of the group where they were meeting in Cyrus Farnsworth's house, was a young man, Cyrus's nephew, Eugene Farnsworth. Eugene thought to himself, if Ellen White is for real, if she's not just making all this up and somebody's told her all this, she's going to rebuke my father, William Farnsworth. That was Cyrus's older brother, William Farnsworth. Now, Eugene, the son, knew what most people did not know, and that is that William Farnsworth was using tobacco again. He'd said he'd given it up, but he was using it. And so here he is, out in the woods in the snow. Sometimes he would chew a little tobacco, spit into the snow, kick it over with his boot. His son, who was working behind him, working with him out in the woods, he would come along and see what was going on. He knew what his father was doing, that his father was being a hypocrite. But nobody else, maybe one other person in the church knew, but almost nobody knew that William Farnsworth was using tobacco. So here is Eugene sitting there thinking, if she's genuine, she'll bring this up. She'll point it out that my father is doing this. And as he would say later, almost as soon as the thought went through his mind, Ellen White turned to William Farnsworth and said, and I've been shown that you're a slave of the nicotine habit. Now, what do you think is going through Eugene's mind at that point? Obviously, he's very surprised because he's just barely thought, well, this is what she'll do if she's really from God. And now here she is rebuking William Farnsworth. Well, that meeting went on for about 5 hours, as I just said a minute ago. And I don't know about you, but most of us have a thing or two in our lives that we just do not have pointed out in front of everybody in the church. I can imagine some people are probably sitting kind of slumped down in their chairs or whatever, thinking, I hope she doesn't point at me. But a real revival broke out. And people that had, there was a small farming community, people that had cheated each other in farming, business deals, etc., were asking for forgiveness, promising to make things right. I mean, a revival broke out. Well, once the parents, the adults, had made things right with God, then on Christmas Day, December 25, 1868, James and Ellen White and Elder Andrews, Shane Andrews, they started working on the young people, trying to get them to give their hearts to the Lord. And 13 young people gave their heart to the Lord that day as a result of that meeting. And 5 others that were not there, but later heard about it, did also. So out of that revival came 18 young people. 12 of them decided to be baptized right then. So they went out, this is middle of winter in New Hampshire, with thick snow. They went out, chopped a hole in the ice, and baptized 12 of those young people. The other 6 decided to wait till the spring. Now, I'm from California. My guess is I'd have been with the 6 waiting till the spring when the water was a bit warmer. But 12 of those young people, someone later counted up to see what happened to those 18 young people that gave their heart to the Lord in that revival of 1868. 9 of them eventually became workers for the church, either pastors, teachers, Bible workers, nurses, and as far as could be told, all of them remained church members as a revival of 1868, just showing how God worked in a unique way, one that we would not necessarily expect, but a unique way to bring revival and conversion to so many people there in Washington, New Hampshire.